I'll meet you outside the doctor's house in 20 minutes. As he closed the door on Campbell, Henderson could hardly believe his luck. He would make damned sure everything went smoothly. But for him, not for Joe or Elizabeth. She wouldn't get her father's consent to marry Joe. Not in this lifetime. They placed Joe carefully in the carriage, but only Elizabeth got in. Henderson sat up front with the driver to give her some privacy. The driver was a jovial man who talked a lot. He was pleased to have a companion on the journey. Chapter 14. They trundled out along the coast road as daylight began to fade. Elizabeth sat with Joe in her arms, like somebody holds a limp corpse. "Don't you die on me, Joe," she whispered. "Don't you leave me yet. I don't know whether you can hear me, Joe, but if you can, I am sorry for my cruel words. They were words of my father. He has tried to mold me into something I am really not. I contradict myself so much. I wanted adventure and I used you to get it, knowing full well that I had no future with you. And I did not care. They were selfish motives. I wanted both fun and wealth." She sighed. "Oh God, listen to me. I'm making so no sense. What is it that I want? I wish somebody could tell me. Do I want wealth? Do I want to be like my father? Obsessive? Or do I want to be free from the etiquettes of society? Sometimes I think it is because I resent my father that I am disobeying the rules. But given the choice, I would choose security over uncertainty. I am not brave, Joe. You were right. I am too afraid to give up the comfort. Like it or loathe it, I am shackled to it." Up front, the driver yawned. "Been one hell of a long day, let me tell you. Can't wait to get to North Berwick. Get some rest. I've got this lovely inn." He never spoke another word. The knife blade slashed across his throat so suddenly he knew nothing about it. He fell sideways onto his seat as Henderson grabbed the reins out of his hands and pulled the horses to a gentle stop. He urged them into the side. There was no one around. The coast road was quiet. A full moon stared down at them, and by its light Henderson could see in both directions. He removed the pistol from his belt and jumped to the ground. He walked calmly round to the door of the carriage and popped it open. "Why have we stopped?" Elizabeth began saying, and then she saw the moonlight reflected in one long streak along the polished barrel of the pistol. "Oh God," she whispered. "Not even God can save you now, sweetheart. But you might as well let him hear your prayers." Elizabeth closed her eyes. She took one deep breath. Because of the darkness, Henderson caught the movement of her hand too late. The tiny, delicate pistol she always carried with her when she travelled had been concealed under her coat. It now came up level with his head. There was a bright flash and a loud bang, and Henderson fell back onto the ground. The horses went berserk. They reared and whinnied in panic, and in the next moment they had broken free of their harnesses and were galloping off down the road. Elizabeth grabbed hold of Joe and dragged him out of the carriage. She had no idea how far it was to North Berwick, or even if she could carry him at all, but she would have to try. 3 years earlier. Henderson woke with the light streaming through his tiny window. He rolled over to kiss Alison, and realized she wasn't there. Instead, lying on the sheet next to him, was a letter. "My dear David, if you are reading this, it may well be under bad circumstances. I cannot bear to know that you think I was betraying you. So here is my side of the story. Several of my friends worked in the brothels of the high street. They told me they made good money. Some of them have families. We needed the money, David, and that is the only reason I did it. It was just my body, not my heart. And if it makes you feel any better, I hated every minute of it. until Richard walked in one evening and everything changed. He wanted to lie with me, and I told him it was out of the question. He returned over the next few weeks, still wanting to lie with me, and each time I refused. It was too personal. He was your friend. He should not have been asking to sleep with his friend's wife. But I knew he liked me, and I knew he would be gentler than my other clients. He's also rich, and he had offered to pay me a lot more. So the next time he came, I took him into my bed. It became a regular appointment after that. He would help us out in return for carnal favours. But I did not know just how much he was prepared to help. One night as he lay with me, he made me a promise, or a proposition, and one I could not refuse. For frequent sex, he would leave us one of his estates in his will. If I would agree to it, he would speak to his lawyer tomorrow, stating that in the event of his death, an estate would be passed to us, along with £3,000. This was several months ago. When I heard that Borthwick's Close had been quarantined off, I went to his lawyer's office to see the will. But his lawyer informed me that the will was at Richard's house. I have gone to get that will, David. I have gone to secure our future. You know the Falklingers burn the belongings of plague victims. I am so afraid those documents will not survive the cleansing flames. If I get caught, know that I tried only to improve our way of life. With all my love, Alison. Henderson leapt out of bed, pulled on some clothes and tore down the stairs. He ran up the close onto the high street, twice nearly slipping in sewage. He turned towards Borthwick's Close, and then he saw it. The gallows outside the town guard booth, set up for infected people trying to escape quarantine. A corpse dangled from the rope, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. As if in a trance, Henderson moved towards it. The corpse was female. Long, dark hair covered her face. Henderson began to shake. The corpse was wearing a shawl, not unlike the one Alison wore. With trembling hands, he reached up and drew back her hair from the dirked head. His wife's dead eyes stared down at him. Henderson screamed. He grabbed hold of the rope around her neck and wrenched it off. He laid her down on the ground. "Alison," he wailed. "What have they done to you?" "Hey, you! Stand back from that corpse!" Henderson took one look at the town guard and lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. "Who did this?" he yelled. "Tell me, you bastard!" "I didn't touch her," replied the town guard in fright. "It was two Baileys. They caught her coming out of Borthwick's Close last night. It's the law, you know that. If anybody is caught coming out of quarantine..." "She went to see a friend. She wasn't infected." "How do you know?" "She was my wife." "She entered an infected area." Henderson drew a knife from his belt and pressed it against the guard's neck. "Tell me their names." "I can't," pleaded the town guard. "Can't or won't?" asked Henderson, pressing the blade further against the skin of his throat. The guard didn't answer. "I know how corrupt you boys are, so don't give me any rubbish about honour. Who did this to her?" Henderson opened his eyes. His head was splitting with the pain. Elizabeth's shot had grazed his left temple, and he'd struck his head on a rock after falling. He tried to move, but the exertion made his head ache even more. He managed to roll over onto his side. The rage now burnt even brighter in his heart. The guard had spilled his guts, told him everything, including the fact that Alison had a set of documents in her possession, which she had claimed was a will. She had made them promise to deliver it to Mr. Gilchrist, which they had duly done. Henderson had gone to see Gilchrist that very same day. He had then paid the town guard to keep his mouth shut. Henderson dragged himself to his feet now, and began walking east along the coast road. Chapter 15. Dr. Lamont heard frantic knocking on his front door at 9:30 and ran to answer it. It was who he was expecting, but not as he saw them. Elizabeth stood there, her cheeks flushed red, her hair matted with sweat. Her chest was heaving in breath. At her feet lay Joe. "My God, what—" "Can we come in, Doctor?" Lamont helped her to carry Joe into his operating room. "What happened to you?" "We were attacked by Campbell's men. I suspect he and Campbell are the guilty party in all this. My father has never gone on with him." "I can't say I know Campbell. I was contacted by Dr. Coburn. He sent a message boy ahead. Now, we must waste no time. Lamont laid Joe down on top of the large table. In the corner of the room, tethered to the wall, was a yew. Coburn said you knew how to help Joe. Yes, said Lamont, through transfusion of blood. The procedure is not perfected by any means, but I have been experimenting for some years now, and I have been successful recently in transfusion from sheep to humans. Human to human has never yet worked. It has only resulted in death for both recipient and donor. Lamont began preparing. Did you know that the first blood transfusion ever performed was on Pope Innocent the 8th, I think? Yes, of course, that's what it was, in 1492. When the pontiff slipped into a coma, the blood from 3 boys was infused into him by simply pouring it into his mouth. Of course, this was before Harvey's discovery of circulation. Needless to say, the Pope died. So did the 3 boys. Lamont held up what looked like to Elizabeth to be a very strange contraption. This is what I will perform the transfusion with this evening. I am very proud of it. It is the intestinal tract of a dog, dried and preserved. As you observe, one end is attached to a cylinder thimble. This allows me to pour the blood from the ewe's vein, which I collect in a jug, down the tubing to the other end. Now, in this recipient's arm is another cylinder thimble, which I got a blacksmith to melt down and mould into a sharp point. He held up the object for Elizabeth to see. The sharp hollow point is inserted into Joe's vein, the other end attached, like the other one, to the tubing. And this is what allows the sheep's blood to flow easily into Joe's arm. Wonderful, don't you think? Truly, replied Elizabeth. Then I tie a rag tight round the ewe's leg to swell the vein. Suddenly the window exploded inwards with shards of glass and fire. Elizabeth screamed as the burning torch landed next to the doctor. There was a loud bang and a bullet sped through the shattered window, removing part of Lamont's scalp in an instant. The flames took hold of the ewe's woolly coat, and the whole animal went up. It broke free of its restraints and began charging round the room, bleating wildly, at the same time setting everything else on fire. Elizabeth dragged Joe off the table onto the floor. She ran for the doctor through the smoke and grabbed the tubing. Another bullet whizzed through the window, narrowly missing her. She screamed in terror and began crawling back towards Joe across the floor. As she crawled, she passed over a trapdoor with a ring in it. It was their only hope. She tugged on the ring and the door heaved open. She pushed Joe into the hole and tumbled in after him. They fell into what appeared at first to be nothing more than a cellar, obviously where the doctor stored his equipment and supplies. The walls, from what you could see of them, looked hollowed out, as though somebody had carved this room out of the rock. For a while she lay there on the floor with Joe, trying to get her breath under control, and trying desperately to think of a way to escape. The only thing they could do was wait for the flames to subside. Perhaps then he would think they had perished. Henderson loaded more bullets into his gun and watched the house being devoured by the fire. The doctor lived a mile outside the town of North Berwick. There would be no rescue party. He would patrol that house until it had burnt to its foundations, or until he was sure that nobody inside could have survived. He peered in through the window of the doctor's study, shielding his face from the searing heat, and saw the open trapdoor. Elizabeth struggled to her feet, her heart thumping, sweat pouring down her face and neck. The fire raged above her head. She could feel its intensity, could see it through the gaps in the floorboards. Those would eventually burn through, she thought to herself, and then they would be in trouble. It was only a matter of time, unless there was another way out of this cellar. She stumbled forward, exploring the space. Did it lead anywhere? Were there any other caverns or recesses in the rock? Yes, straight ahead was a dark passageway. Perhaps there were other rooms they could shelter in. A piece of burning wood now fell through the trapdoor. Only one half of it was burned. The other half was unscathed. She picked it up cautiously and headed forward into the passage. Henderson hesitated for a long time. Should he stay, or should he finish the job like a man? They wouldn't survive down there, would they? Could he really risk taking a chance and walk away? Elizabeth walked forward down the passage. The ceiling was low, and there was definite signs of a chisel. She kept going forward. There were more recesses here, large ones filled with wooden boxes. Still she moved further in. What was this place? It certainly was no ordinary cellar. It's a cave system, she whispered. But how far did it go? And was it going inland or towards the sea? If it was towards the sea, then it would come out there, inland, and it would be a dead end, quite literally. She went back for Joe. She grabbed him around the waist and heaved him up. Her back and arms already ached from the carrying him 3 miles along the coast road. She had constantly had to stop and rest, but she had eventually spotted one of the escaped horses and was able to travel the rest of the way on that. She had no idea where the doctor lived, but a sign just outside the town gave her directions. She now put him over her shoulder and tried to stand, but almost immediately collapsed. "Come on, Joe, wake up. We need to get out of here." But Joe was in no condition to wake. She had to try again. This time she managed to walk several paces before she succumbed. She needed one hand free to hold the torch, as the entire place was pitch black. Henderson climbed in through the broken window. The heat was almost unbearable. He stepped carefully through the burning room towards the trapdoor. When he reached it, he aimed his gun down into the hole before jumping in. He landed on his feet. It was dark, but by the light coming through the trapdoor he spotted a lantern hanging on the wall. He grabbed it, found a tinder and flint, lit the tallow candle inside, and held it aloft. He saw the passage up ahead, and he saw the drag marks in the dirt floor. Elizabeth had her right arm wrapped around Joe's chest and was pulling him along slowly but surely when she heard her own name being called. "Elizabeth! I know you're in there. How far do you really think you're going to get with a dead weight? Because I'm not going to give up, sweetheart. He both knows too much." Panic rose in Elizabeth's chest. She forced herself to move faster, but he was right. How far could she get with Joe? If she dumped him and she ran, then there would have been more chance. But leaving Joe behind was not an option. With all her strength and will, she increased her pace. Henderson was laughing now. "I'll be honest with you, Elizabeth. This is too easy. I like a bit of a challenge. There's no fun in it otherwise." The flaming piece of wood Elizabeth held had almost burned right down to her hand. She would have to discard it soon, and then she wouldn't be able to see anything. She wasn't going to make it. Suddenly her heart leapt. Up ahead the tunnel opened up into a wider chamber, with what looked like 3 different tunnels branching off that. There was now a possibility of eluding him. She only needed to choose one tunnel. He would have to choose from 3. She moved even faster now. She would have to make her decision quickly. She had a matter of minutes before he caught up with her. 2 of the tunnel entrances were fully hollowed out, but the 3rd tunnel entrance was 3 feet above the ground. In a snap decision, she heaved Joe onto her shoulder and made for that tunnel. She dumped in through the entrance and clambered in after him. The tunnel sloped downwards, but it was very small. The roof of the tunnel was only about a foot above her head. It was crouching room only. She lay flat on her stomach and began crawling along with one hand while pulling Joe along behind her. But his head was quickly getting scraped and bumped. So instead she turned and lay on her back, then pulled Joe up between her legs. She hooked both her hands under his armpits and pushed herself along using her feet. The torch now petered out, and she found herself immersed in darkness. She could see nothing or hear nothing. She gripped Joe tighter under his arms and kept propelling herself along the tunnel, inch by inch. Chapter 16. Lloyd was walking through the deserted streets of Edinburgh with George, another Bailey. It was eerily quiet. White rags hung from almost every second window. They were making their way down towards Borthwick's Close, which had recently been quarantined off. As they approached, a black figure shot out of the close and made a dash for the other side of the high street. "After her!" shouted Lloyd. They chased after the woman, who in panic changed direction and began running down towards Netherwood Port. But George caught up with her and grabbed her around the waist. She began screaming. Lloyd caught up with them. "Borthwick's Close is infected," he said. "What do you think you're doing coming out?" She had something in her hand. "What's this?" he asked, taking it off her. "I need that. It's a last will and testament." Lloyd looked at her for a long while. She was young and desperate. But the law was the law, and Lloyd knew it to the letter. "You know the rules, ma'am. No one comes out of quarantine." "I don't live there. You entered a quarantine area? What the hell did you think you were doing?" "I needed to get that will. It has to go to someone. Please, just let me go. I'm not infected." "How do we know that? You've been in contact with a plague victim. We shouldn't even be touching you." "What do we do with her, Lloyd?" asked George. "There are only 2 options. Either we put her back in Borthwick's Close, which, by the way, should have had a town guard on the lookout tonight, or we make an example of her. There's been too much of this. The people need to be reminded of the penalties for trying to escape quarantine." "I'm begging you," whispered Alison. Lloyd took a deep breath. "No," he replied. He began walking towards the guard booth and the makeshift gallows. "Bring her!" Alison began screaming now in sheer terror. Lloyd tried to ignore her. What the hell was he doing? He was about to put someone to death. But it was his job. It was either that or she would die of a horrendous disease that had already killed hundreds. They might all be dead soon enough. Was it kinder to do this to her now? Put her down like a sick horse? He had to believe it was. He had to. "Oh God, please!" she screamed. Lloyd sat bolt upright in bed. His heart pounded. Sweat smeared his forehead. For a long time he sat in the darkened attic room at the top of the manse. Sat and thought. Suddenly he became aware that somebody was sitting on the end of his bed. "Annie?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right?" "Yes," she said again. Lloyd sighed. "Bad dreams?" she inquired. "Bad memories," replied Lloyd. He lit a candle. She was wrapped in a dark robe. Her face was pale. "Do you want to tell me?" Lloyd hesitated. "I was a bailie in Edinburgh during the plague. I was in charge of quarantine. I executed a woman who was trying to evade it. It was the worst thing I have ever done. It took me a long time to get over it. I kept seeing her face, kept hearing her terrified cries. I managed eventually to bury it. I thought forever. But now she has come back to haunt me, and I think I know why." Marshall sat on his straw pile and brooded. What had he done with his life? For years he had thought his mother was dead, that he had nobody, no family, nobody who loved him. He had left the orphanage at age 18 with no prospects. He had had to fend for himself. And that's when he had met Henderson. Henderson was looking for an accomplice in a job. He had offered Marshall good money. He could not turn it down. The job was simple. He was the lookout man. He would stand watch while Henderson went about his business. He didn't need to know what that business was. All he had to do was whistle when he spotted a bailie coming. It was easy enough. That first job was the start of a good friendship between these two men, professional and private. They did many jobs together, usually burglary. But Henderson had another job. He was a murderer, hired by clients for a lot of money to have people disposed of. One day Henderson was offered £200 to murder a prominent lawyer. He'd accepted. But on the same day on another job he had injured his hand. So Marshall had said he would do the deed himself. And it had all gone terribly wrong from there. Barney entered his cell with a plate of food. "Barney, there's something I need to tell you." 15 minutes later, Campbell stood there before him. "Well," he said, "I have never done anything right in my life. In telling you this, I hope to change that. But I still want to plead the King's protection. That might depend on what you have to tell me. My confession was entirely false. I was approached by a man who told me what to say. I doubt Lloyd had anything to do with it. This man is a killer. I know. I once went with him on a kill. I was supposed to do it, as he had injured himself, but he was there as a backup. Our quarry was a prominent lawyer in Edinburgh. I do not recall his name. It was the middle of the night. I entered his bedchamber with a lantern. I was supposed to shoot him, but he had obviously heard us coming and was ready with his own gun. He fired at me, and I was hit in the shoulder. He would have killed me had my friend not come in at that moment and shot him 3 times. He got me out of there and took care of me. He got me to a private surgeon, and we lay low for a couple of weeks. He saved my life." Campbell stared at Barney. "That sounds awfully familiar," he said in a low voice. "Where was this lawyer living?" "Top of the Upper Bow, just next to the Lawn Market." Campbell looked hard at Marshall. "When was this? About 6 years ago?" Campbell squatted down in front of him. "Now listen to me. If you give me your friend's name, you can make any deal you want. Who is he?" "His name is James Henderson, and he lives on Mary King's Close." Campbell stiffened. "What?" Marshall nodded. "That's who he is. Now can I make my deal?" Campbell straightened up. "Let me clarify this. You're telling me Henderson told you to make a statement against Lloyd?" Marshall nodded. "That is correct." And you're telling me Henderson shot this lawyer? I am. Campbell nodded slowly. Thank you. But before I make any deal, I need to know I can trust you. Marshall shrugged. All I can tell you is that Henderson took trophies from his victims. He took a ring from the lawyer. I believe it had his family crest, said Campbell. How do you know that? Because I have the same crest. He was my brother. Marshall's eyes widened. Keep him here, Barney. I have to check on something out. 20 minutes later, Campbell charged out to the Netherby port in a carriage bound for an estate just east of Edinburgh. With him were the Lord Provost and 2 town guards. Where exactly are we going again? Asked the Provost. To a house belonging to Henderson. He inherited it 3 years ago. Campbell cleared his throat. Look, sir, I need to come clean. You can do whatever you want to me. I deserve it. But I need to explain about Henderson and me. Go on. Henderson is one of my contacts, but he is also a thief. We have been in partnership for a year. I scope out the location, Henderson does the looting. Then we sell it to a buyer. We use this house as our base. All the goods go there. Jesus, Campbell! I know. You were right to suspect me in the past. I am corrupt. So why are you telling me all this? You've never liked Lloyd. Why not let him rot? Because I have a conscience, believe it or not. I'm not doing this for Lloyd. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for my brother. Aaron Campbell paced the floor of his living room as his brother stared down at the lawn market below. You are my brother. I care about you. And I am telling you, you cannot continue the way you are going. Just because you turned your back on our father. Because he asked me to help him fiddle the books. And when I refused, he asked you, something I will never forgive him for. Becoming a lawyer was my way of demonstrating how angry I was at him. He corrupted you. I knew what he was up to over the years. That is why I was forever reminding you of right from wrong. I wanted to limit the effect he might have on you, but the one thing you didn't understand was that I didn't care about right or wrong. I am not you. I am my father's son. And when he asked me to help him, I was more than willing, especially when I found out that you weren't. That hurts me. Campbell looked back down into the lawn market below. A fat sow was grazing on the sludge that accumulated round the bales. I suppose you don't care, then, that if you get caught out, it will not look good for me. A lawyer with a rogue for a brother. Campbell didn't answer. Unless, of course, I informed on you. Campbell spun round. You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I? It would teach you a lesson, and a valuable one, too. Aaron sighed. Look, all I want, he said slowly, is for my brother to lead an honest life. Break away from our father's influence. If I can do it, so can you. I have no desire to fall out over this. 2 days after that conversation, his brother was dead, and now Campbell knew who the trigger man was. The very person he had worked so closely with over the last few years. Had Henderson made the connection before now? Did he realize he was working for the brother of one of his victims? So who had hired him to frame Lloyd? There was no hatred towards Lloyd anymore. Now they were after the same man. It was a vendetta they had in common. Campbell would do everything he could to help Lloyd now. As Marshall had said of himself, he had done nothing right in his life, and he wanted to change that. By helping Lloyd and bringing his brother's killer to justice, Campbell hoped to do the same. They arrived at the large house a little after 10 o'clock. Campbell opened it up with a large bunch of keys, and they went in. What are we looking for? Asked the Provost. Definitive proof that Henderson is our man. And what is that? The ring he took from my brother. Where do we start looking for something that size? There's a room in the lower tower. I once found a box there with objects I didn't recognize. It looked like loot, but when I questioned him about it, he became angry, saying it was nothing to do with me. I never saw the box again after that, as if he'd moved it. But that's the best place to start. They made their way down into the bowels of the building and unlocked the room in the tower. It was small, but filled from floor to ceiling with boxes. I'm worried, said Campbell. Why? Asked the Provost. I sent Henderson with Elizabeth and Joe to North Berwick at Coburn's instructions. I thought Lloyd had tried to kill Joe, and I wanted information as soon as possible. The Provost was staring at Campbell. You sent that man with Elizabeth? Campbell nodded. The Provost turned on his heels and started running for the door. But at that instant the door banged shut and the key that Campbell had left in the lock was turned on him. "What the hell?" shouted the Provost. Campbell ran towards it and put his back against it. The door didn't even shudder. "Those bastards," said Campbell. "Town guards are more corrupt than us Baileys." "What are you talking about?" "Henderson had men everywhere." The Provost kicked the door in frustration. "God damn it, Campbell! What do we do now?" Campbell shook his head. "I have no idea." The Provost grabbed Campbell by the scruff with both hands. "That animal is with Lloyd's daughter. If anything happens to her, I'll kill him for you," said Campbell. "With pleasure." Chapter 17. Annie stared at Lloyd in shock. "So that's the situation I find myself in. And I know this hanging is directly linked to it. What are you going to do?" "Try and find out who it is who wants revenge for that. But while there is an arrest warrant out for me, there's not much I can do. I feel entirely helpless. White is in trouble because of me." He put his head in his hands. "I have ruined so many people's lives. White's, Elizabeth's, yours, this man's. I took away his wife? Daughter? I don't know. No wonder he wants me dead. Not only dead, he wants me to hang too, so I can experience what she experienced. A slow, painful death. I did instruct my colleague to pull in her legs to quicken the process." He closed his eyes. "That is why he framed me. However he did it. To have me found guilty of murder and sent to the gallows. He wants that outcome so much he is prepared to kill innocent people to get it." "It is not your fault," said Annie quietly. "But someone needs to take the blame. Why not me? I deserve to die. I'm an obsessive, stupid man who cares about nothing but money." He raised his head and looked at her. "It was wrong what I said to you, about being your duty to marry whomever your father wanted you to. I'm a father now, who is about to make the same mistake. I thank God I met you again before I went ahead with it. And I swear to that same God that I will, if I can, put right what I have done wrong, starting with you. I will arrest that bastard and throw him in the toll booth to live out the rest of his days. I will clear White's name and make sure that money is given back to him. And I will bless any marriage that Elizabeth wishes to enter into. No more will I be that uncaring father who puts his business before everything else." Annie moved up the bed and sat next to him. She laid a hand on his face. "You do not have to avenge me, William. It makes no difference now." "What do you mean?" "Just before I came up here, I swallowed arsenic. It will soon take effect." "What?" "I am tired, William. I wanted to see you one last time. I wanted you to be here when I died." Lloyd leapt out of bed and tore down the stairs. He rushed out the front door and across the road in his bare feet. He ran like the wind to the nearest house and hammered madly on the door. He was not actually expecting Roger to open it, but he did. "What the hell do you want?" "It's Annie. She swallowed arsenic." McGrath was out of the house in a second and followed Lloyd back to the manse. They rushed up to the attic room. "Annie, what have you done?" cried McGrath. She was starting to lose consciousness. All she kept saying was, "I love you." "William, stay with her. I'm going for help." McGrath ran back to this house, pulled on some clothes and ran to get his horse out of the field. He saddled her up and galloped for Edinburgh. There was no doctor in the village. Coburn was the only doctor he knew about. He had patients here, whom he would call upon regularly, including his father. At top speed, he would be able to make it to Edinburgh in about 20 minutes. Lloyd lay back down on the bed next to Annie and held her. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "And soon I shall never have pain again. I will never feel his hand on me. I will never be afraid. I will never lie awake and wonder what my daughter would have been like." "Your daughter?" asked Lloyd. "I had a daughter 2 years ago, but she died when she was only a few hours old." "Why?" "Because Clarence wanted a boy, not a girl. So he smothered her with a pillow." "Dear God!" exclaimed Lloyd. "Do you think I will see her?" asked Annie. "You will see her, I promise." "Thank you, William." "For what?" "For showing me some tenderness. It is a long time since I have felt any, and I always knew it would come from you." Lloyd burst into tears. "Oh God, Annie, I'm so sorry. Forgive me for letting you suffer like this. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt anybody. But through my actions, I have done just that. God, forgive me." He hugged her to him and poured out his grief. An hour later, Dr. Coburn found them still together. Annie was unconscious. "Lloyd, what are you—" "Help me. Help her. For the love of God, help her." "I will do what I can, but William, you know that Joe was attacked yesterday." "Oh no." He stood up. "How?" "Stabbed. I could do nothing for him. I sent him and Elizabeth to a colleague of mine in North Berwick. If you ask me, I think you should go there at once." Chapter 18. The Provost watched Campbell as he searched through boxes. "I could do with some help here, sir." The Provost grudgingly rose from the step and joined him. "Why would they be so stupid?" asked the Provost. "Who?" "Those town guards." Campbell laughed. Town guards are not known for their intelligence." "Who knew we were coming here?" asked the Provost. "Barney knew I was going somewhere." "Somewhere?" The Provost sighed. "Can we break that door down?" "No," said Campbell bluntly. "It's 6 inches of solid oak, with 24 iron studs set into it. This room was designed as a vault. We're not going anywhere, so we may as well make the most of it. Grab that box from there, would you?" "Why are you suddenly so calm about—" "I'm not. I'm just trying not to panic. I don't like small spaces, nor heights for that matter." "So why do you live in Edinburgh?" asked the Provost sarcastically. Campbell chuckled, but the Provost quickly changed the subject. "If they're working for Henderson, then we're dead." The Provost was beginning to panic now himself. "Look," said Campbell, as calmly as possible, "let's just try and focus on finding this ring for now. Panicking is not going to do either of us any good. Besides, I'm armed, so at least we can fight back if we need to." The Provost took a deep breath and nodded. They continued to examine the contents of each box, one after the other. "Tell me something, David. You know Lloyd well. Is there anything he did in the past that would drive someone up to these lengths? Why not just shoot him? Marshall said Henderson was an assassin. Rich people hire assassins, not poor people. Somebody wants to see Lloyd hang. Somebody who doesn't want blood on their hands." The Provost shook his head. "Lloyd is a good man. He is popular, respected. I know all that, David. I'm looking for a time when perhaps he wasn't such an angel." "I don't know, Campbell. I genuinely don't know." "What do you know of Henderson?" "Not a lot, actually. He's obviously a secretive little shit. I know he used to be married. He has a sketch of her in this apartment." "Used to be?" asked the Provost. "I think she died in the plague. That's all I was able to glean from him. He didn't like talking about her." Suddenly Campbell spotted a box that had been tucked away behind the others. He noticed it because it was the only one with a lock. "David," he said, pointing to the box. They retrieved it. Campbell took aim with his pistol and blew the lock to smithereens. He flipped back the lid. "This is it. This is the box I found." It was full of little trinkets. Campbell tipped the contents out onto the floor and began sifting through them. There were a bunch of papers in there, which he threw aside. The Provost picked them up. Campbell was intent on his search for his brother's ring. A moment later he found what he was looking for. Campbell shook his fist in triumph. "We have him," he said. The Provost didn't answer. Campbell kissed his family crest and inwardly said a prayer. He rose. "We have him, David," he said again. "Now all we have to do is find the man behind this business with Lloyd." "I don't think we have to look any further than these papers." He looked up. "These are diary extracts. They're all about his wife. You're right, she did die in the plague, but not from the pestilence. She was hung for breaking quarantine regulations. I remember it now. She was the only woman to be hung. There were 2 the previous year, but they were both men. The man in charge of quarantine, the man directly responsible for her execution, was William Lloyd." Campbell stared at the Provost. "Nobody ordered this, Campbell. This was personal. We have enough evidence here to arrest Henderson." Campbell nodded slowly. He sat down on one of the boxes. "Are you all right?" asked the Provost. Campbell raised his hand. "Just give me a moment," he said quietly. The Provost folded up the papers and put them away in his coat pocket. He watched Campbell sit with his head in his hands. "What are you thinking?" asked the Provost. Campbell wiped his eyes. "I miss my brother. I'm thinking I'm not interested in making it out of here alive. I don't think I have it in me to go straight. I've helped Lloyd. I've found my brother's killer. I am content to die now, but you must make it through here alive, because if you don't, neither will I. And then you will have to help no one." Campbell looked up at the Provost. "I'm going to tell him I'm sorry. I'm going to tell him I love him." Tears rolled down Campbell's cheeks. The Provost nodded. "I know how you feel. I lost my wife several years ago to tuberculosis. I couldn't help her. I couldn't keep her safe. My sister, God bless her, told me there was nothing I or anyone else could have done for her. But I continue to blame myself. I want to tell her every day that I'm sorry, that I miss her so much, that she was the most beautiful thing in my life. Henderson takes lives at random. He does not care who he hurts, and yet he knows how painful loss is, how it tears people apart. No, Campbell, you must stay alive. Death comes to us all, but perhaps only when it is our time. Until then, you must make the most out of what you have. We must honor our loved ones by the lives we live, by the goodness we sow." The Provost was crying now too. "Let's stay alive together, Campbell. Let's do what we can to be good men, so that when we meet our loved ones again in heaven, they will be proud to know us." The two men put their arms around each other in that little room, in a private moment of mutual support and friendship. Suddenly they heard the key turn in the lock of the door. Campbell sprang to his feet. He grabbed his pistol and flattened himself against the wall. "Get behind me, sir," he told the Provost. The Provost obeyed immediately. The door creaked open. "Hello? Campbell, are you there? Who is that?" "It's me, sir. Roland." Campbell stepped forward, holding the pistol at arm's length. Roland had blood dripping down his right temple. "What's going on?" demanded Campbell. "Smith tried to kill me. We need to get after him." "I already did that, sir, and I did a better job than he did on me." Campbell lowered his pistol. "Good man," he said. Chapter 19. When Henderson had reached the spot where the tunnels divided, he had stopped short. The drag marks he had been following had suddenly disappeared. He swore bitterly. Where the hell had they gone? He made up his mind quickly, though, and dashed down one of the tunnels to his left. "I'm going to find you, bitch, and when I do, you're going to be begging for mercy. You know your father's a murderer. He took my wife away from me. Do you want to know how I framed him? I'll tell you, shall I? I bided my time. I kept an eye on him. I even bought wine for him once or twice. You see, I wanted to be a little more creative with him than I was with his colleague. He had to hang, like he hung my beloved. But how do you get a man of that stature to hang? You have to make it look as though he murdered someone in cold blood, and you have to make the evidence speak for itself. I'm a burglar, along with a few other traits. I'm used to getting in and out of people's houses. I have a handy set of well-made skeleton keys. First of all, the body had to be found somewhere where only he had access. His imbecile apprentice was easy to befriend and manipulate. I got to know him well. I offered him £100 if he would help me break into the storeroom. He knew his way around. He knew which wines were kept where. I convinced him that I needed his help locating and moving the crates. I told him Lloyd wasn't paying him enough. But I wanted a particular murder weapon, one that I couldn't find. His ceremonial dagger. The plan was to kill the apprentice with it, and then leave it by the body. I had got into his house in about a week before to look for it, but it wasn't there. I asked Ashcroft if he knew where it kept it. He told me he put it in the storeroom for the safety of the children. On the night of the murder, when we broke into the storeroom, Ashcroft fetched it for me, like a dog fetching a stick. Henderson laughed. He actually presented me with the weapon I was about to kill him with. But instead of leaving it by the body, I took it with me, because at that time I thought of a backup plan. If the Provost came to his friend's aid, I could use the dagger again, planting it next to another body. Joe's, as it turned out. And if that failed, I had another card to play. He had to go to the gallows. There had to be no doubt whatsoever of his guilt. Nowhere for him to run. And now there's nowhere for you to run either. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was still dragging Joe through the claustrophobic darkness of a tunnel that for all she knew was a dead end. She was getting extremely tired now. There was no energy left in her arms or legs. She stopped pulling him and laid her head back against the cold rock. The air was getting thinner. There was absolute silence. Was this where she was going to die? This was not quite the adventure she had wanted. She touched Joe's face, slowly tracing his features with her fingers. She knew them so well. His small chin, the long, smooth bridge of his nose, his rough lips. She rested her fingers on those for the longest time. He liked to kiss her fingers. He liked it when she stroked his face with them. She wanted him to kiss them now. "Kiss my fingers, Joe," she sobbed. "Kiss them like you used to. Please. Joe, please speak to me." She felt so alone and so afraid. She wanted to hear his voice in that black void. She began to pray. "Dear Lord, help me. In the name of your Son, Jesus, who saved us all, save me now. Save us both. I know I have sinned, and I know I have not always done what you want of me in the past, but I am begging you to forgive me. I am still young. There is time to learn, time to sort out my mistakes. You are the all-powerful one. You alone have the power to grant me this wish. I humbly wait for your judgment." She closed her eyes, hugged Joe as tightly to her as she could, and wept until she lost consciousness. When she woke, she had no sense of time or place. She didn't know if Joe was still alive or if he was dead, but she had no will to move. She lay completely still. Images from her life flashed into her mind. She saw herself as a young girl. She saw her father and Joe. She saw her siblings and her mother. Then images of Joe and her together came clearly into sight. Suddenly those scenes faded, and a different scene manifested itself in front of her vision. She was on a cliff top, looking out to sea and a setting sun. There was somebody with her, a woman dressed in white with flowing red hair. There was something vaguely familiar about her, like a distant echo from the past, long past. "You cannot give up," she was saying. "You must keep going, Elizabeth. Look towards the light at the end of that tunnel, my dear, for it is there you will find your destiny." "I know you," said Elizabeth. "Of course you do, but not as you see me. I knew your love on the earth plane, and it was glorious. It was my time to pass over, but it is not yours, Elizabeth. It is not yours." Elizabeth suddenly gasped. She stirred herself and began pulling Joe along again with a sudden burst of renewed strength. Further and further she went. It felt like forever, but she did not stop, not for a second. Until suddenly she realized the tunnel was getting lighter. She could see the walls now, and then she saw it, the end of the tunnel. She felt pure joy, and a moment later she was scrambling out into a small, low-ceilinged tavern lit by tallow candles. She pulled Joe out after her and lay on the ground, gulping in mouthfuls of air. After a few minutes she got to her feet. The room was filled with crates. She began examining them, and very soon realized they contained a massive amount of cured meats and bottles of wine. Elizabeth grabbed a leg of ham, put it to her mouth and tore off a huge chunk. She hadn't eaten in several hours. She took a bottle of wine, cracked it open and poured it into her tongue. As she sat and stuffed food down her throat, she wished she could feed Joe, get some strength back into him. And then she remembered that contraption. She pulled it out from the folds of her dress. She looked at it for a long time, thinking. What was it he said? That it had never worked from human to human. She did not care about herself anymore, only Joe. Could this contraption really save his life, even if it took hers? Was there any time left to spare? Or was it fast running out? He looked like a ghost already, she thought. To hell with it, she said suddenly. She removed her cloak and rolled up her sleeve. She tore a strip of fabric off the cloak and tied it tight around her upper arm. She could see her vein begin to swell. She looked around for something sharp like a chipped stone, but she could see nothing. So she took the sharp end of the tubing and stabbed it into her vein. It began to bleed instantly, but now she needed to insert the sharp end into Joe. She pulled back his sleeve and pressed it hard onto the crook of his arm. Then she tried to get her blood to flow into the tubing, but with little success. Most of it was now flowing down her own arm. It began to collect on the bend of her elbow. She positioned the opening of the thimble below the strips. Soon she had a steady drip of blood, but it wasn't enough. She needed to produce more. She dropped the contraption and stood up. She had to find a knife. She searched through the crates, but could find no knife of any kind. She slumped back down onto the floor in despair, landing on the leg of Ham. There was a snap. She'd broken the bone. There was a jagged fracture where the break had occurred. She picked it up and examined it. She touched the point end. In the next second she slashed at her arm with it. A long red tear appeared on the surface of her skin, and a steady stream of blood began to flow from the fresh wound. She slashed again at her arm, and again a large wound opened in her flesh, releasing a gush of blood. Collecting it in something was going to be easier than trying to get it to flow from her wounds down the narrow tube. She poured the wine away and let the blood flow down to the cracked bottleneck. Soon it began to collect in a growing pool at the bottom. For a few minutes she let the blood drain from her body until it had reached a quarter of the way up. Then she tore another large strip of fabric off her cloak and wrapped it tight around her wounds. She now picked up the bottle and poured the blood into the end of the tubing, keeping it up so it would drain quickly into Joe's vein. She gave it several minutes, after which time she removed the tubing from his arm, bound more fabric around that, and lay down to rest. She was already starting to feel dizzy and weak. She needed something to revive her, like whiskey. She staggered to her feet and began searching the crates again. She found Irish whiskey in one of them. She sat back down and began sipping on it. Why was all this stuff here, she wondered. Did this all belong to the doctor? After a while, she stood up and began to explore, out of sheer curiosity. Joe would be fine where he was. Besides, she wouldn't go far. She found another tunnel that led from this chamber into another. Off that chamber were a series of others. It was like a honeycomb. She found casks of wine, whiskey and ale, and all of it from foreign shores. None of it originated from Scotland. Reels of fine silk and cotton were piled in one chamber, while fine silver candlesticks and other objects of wealth were crammed into another. Next door to that were loads more boxes, all piled up on top of each other. These boxes were unmarked. She opened one of them and peered inside. It was stuffed full of pistols and ammunition. She cautiously removed one. The good doctor was not as good as everybody thought. The good doctor was helping smugglers store their loot until it could be sold on. No doubt he was taking a cut of that loot. She loaded the bullets into the pistol and took another swig of whiskey. Her head was still light. She continued exploring. She could smell something now, something like horse dung. There couldn't possibly be horses down here, could there? She rounded a bend in the honeycomb. There were 6 of them, all tethered to the walls. Pack horses. Of course, to transport goods cross-country, thus avoiding the public highways. And a pack horse was exactly what she needed to get Joe out of here. She unhooked one of them and led it back through the rooms to where Joe was still lying. She draped him over the horse's back and put the pistol in the saddlebag. Suddenly she felt a rush of blood to her head. She lost her balance and fell backwards onto the floor. The room began to spin crazily. Her legs were like jelly. She couldn't move. And then she passed out. When she came to again, somebody was standing over her. Joe? No, not Joe. I don't think Joe's going to make it. And now I've got all the time in the world to deal with you. Chapter 20. Elizabeth stared up at Henderson in horror. How did you find you? Well, that's the thing about these cave systems. They tend to connect up. Elizabeth started crying. She was too weak to fight back. Henderson casually removed his waistcoat and draped it over one of the boxes. He took a bottle of wine out of the same box and opened it. He then took a generous swig. You know, I haven't been with a woman in for 3 years, so forgive me if I'm a little rough. He flung himself down on top of her and began licking her face. Elizabeth screamed. He slapped her and grabbed a fistful of her hair. With the other hand, he began ripping her dress off. By God, I'm going to enjoy this. Just you lie still, sweetheart. But at that moment, the muzzle of a pistol was placed against Henderson's temple, and he froze. She's not your sweetheart. The bang reverberated around the walls of the cave, but Henderson never heard it. The bullet had already lodged itself in his brain. Joe! With her last ounce of energy, she grabbed him and pulled him to her. They held each other for a long time. "You're alive," she whispered. "Just... What did you do to me? I gave you my blood." "That was very dangerous, Elizabeth. We could both be dead." "I had no other choice. I couldn't do nothing." She kissed him. "I love you, Joe. I've always loved you. I just couldn't see it. My blood is inside you. I am a part of you now. Please allow me to take back what I said." She looked deep into his eyes. "Joe, let me be your wife. Let me spend the rest of my life by your side, because I want to spend it with nobody else. We saved each other, Joe, in more ways than one." A short while later they were seated together amongst the crates, eating and drinking and carrying on like they were already married. They were sharing a bottle of claret. "I think your father would approve," said Joe. "Of what? The claret or the marriage?" "The claret. Marriage is another story." Joe sighed. "I always wanted to impress him, to show him that I could go far. And then, when I met you, I had another incentive. If I could prove myself worthy, perhaps he would allow me to marry you. How far do you want to go, Joe? What do you think you need to do to make him believe in you?" "My father was head of the town guards. He fought corruption in that institution for years, with little success. I want to take up his fight. I want to root out the scum. That's how far I want to go." "What makes you think he won't already believe in you? You saved my life. You killed the bad man. You're a hero. Not only that, you're my hero. You're not my secret lover anymore. You're the man I'm going to marry, the man who makes me happy. And if he believes in nothing else, he should believe in that." "Maybe he will. I know Mother would approve. God, I hope they pull through. I cannot imagine living without them." "I had a strange dream when I was asleep. I was in a rowing boat on some great body of calm water. When I looked over the side, I saw images and reflections I didn't recognize. One of them was a red-headed girl. She had a lovely smile. She told me the reflections were snippets from past lives, times I had lived on this earth before I, Joe, came into being. It was all so clear. And then I saw my mother. She told me how proud she was of me. The funny thing is, I thought we only lived once, and that if we failed to do good in this world, then our judgment day would be harsh. But it looks like we all get a second chance." Elizabeth was staring at him. "I know, it sounds so odd. No, I too saw this red-headed girl. And I knew her, but I didn't know from where, or when. She said she'd known my love on this earth plane, and that it was her time to go. What does this mean? Have we known each other before, Joe? Are we being given another chance to be together? Did I have to go through this, not to realize how much I love you, but to remember?" Just at that moment, they heard voices echoing through the tunnels. "Elizabeth!" "That's your father," said Joe. He pulled himself to his feet. "Father!" shouted Elizabeth, rising with Joe's help. The next minute, Lloyd appeared round a bend in the adjoining tunnel, accompanied by two of McGrath's men. He flung his arms around his daughter. "Elizabeth!" he exclaimed. "I heard what happened." He turned to Joe. "Thank God you're all right." And then he saw Henderson's body. Elizabeth told him everything that had occurred. Lloyd stiffened. "So it was him. This just confirms my suspicions about Campbell." "No," said Joe. "I was attacked while trying to arrest Henderson. He told me Campbell had nothing to do with it." "But how did you know to arrest him?" "It's a long story, sir. I haven't got the energy just now. Anyway, I think Elizabeth has some news for you." "What news is that?" asked Lloyd. "Father," she began, detaching herself from his embrace and moving towards Joe, "I have made a very important decision, and one I hope you will support. It depends what that decision is. Well, whether or not you support it, my mind is made up. We are getting married, Father. Obviously, it would be easier with your blessing, but that is the situation. He saved my life, and I love him very much." Lloyd said nothing. Elizabeth suddenly lowered her eyes. "Father?" Lloyd gave Joe a sly wink. "Well," he said, "this is news indeed. Firstly, I had no idea that you were that close. You obviously thought it best to keep that from me. Father, let me finish. Second of all, I now need to tell Walter that the marriage is off, a task I do not relish. Elizabeth kept her eyes on the ground. And thirdly, Lloyd paused. I couldn't be more pleased. Elizabeth looked up at his face, a face that was now grinning broadly. He began to chuckle. Come here, my girl. Elizabeth ran back into his arms. Of course you have my blessing. I'm just glad I raised such a stubborn daughter. Elizabeth began laughing through her tears. At 4 o'clock in the morning, White was praying in the darkness of his little cell when he heard the bolts being drawn back on the door. He squinted at the lantern that suddenly appeared and could make out 2 figures behind it. Who is that? He asked. It's me, Campbell. I brought someone to see you. When Lloyd's face emerged into the light, White was at first so shocked he couldn't speak. He was confused. Had Lloyd been finally caught? It's over, he said. You're free to go. White couldn't believe his ears. But now Barney was coming in and undoing his chains. Lloyd helped him to his feet. Make sure the money is returned to him in full, he said. Campbell nodded. And anything else you need, just ask. I don't know how to thank you, William. You don't have to try. Go home to your family. There is one thing you could do for me, if it's not too much trouble. Name it. As they left the cell, Barney took Campbell to one side. I need to talk to you about Marshall. Campbell and Lloyd left the toll booth together. The high street was deserted. Campbell took a moment to look around him. It's nice when it's quiet, he said. Lloyd nodded. Peaceful. The sun will be up soon. You know, the best place to see it is from the castle. Why don't we take a walk up there? They headed towards Castle Hill. I owe you an apology, Lloyd. I believed you were guilty. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, replied Lloyd. Thank you. We got off on the wrong foot. What say we start again? What say we? Said Lloyd. Epilogue. The docks were bustling with people on that crisp, bright morning. A ship was moored alongside the dock wall with its magnificent white sails catching the sun. People were beginning to board. Amongst the passengers was a large family. The children could hardly contain their excitement. Mother, where are we going again? Asked the little girl. We're going on an adventure, said one of her brothers. But where? Holland, said Agnes. White carried his youngest up the gangplank. What's in Holland? A new life, he replied. Just at that moment, White heard his name being called. He turned. Lloyd was standing at the bottom of the plank. White passed the child to his wife and ran down towards his friend. I just came to say goodbye. The 2 men shook hands warmly. Good luck, John. May your lum always reek. Thank you. And thank you for your language lessons. Keep reading the notes. They'll help. I will. How's Catherine? Lloyd smiled. Trying to do too many things. I keep telling her to rest, but she doesn't listen to me. When is the baby due? Not for another few months. Meanwhile, the rest of our children are running circles around her. White chuckled. Take care of yourself, William. An hour later, when the ship was way out in the open sea, a lone figure stood on the deck, looking out over the water. A woman strolled casually towards him and leaned out over the side. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Marshall. Annie nodded. She didn't look at him. Are you travelling alone? Asked Marshall. She moved away at that point and strolled in the other direction. I didn't mean to pry, ma'am, he called after her. Annie stopped. She turned back. I am sorry. That was rude of me. Yes, I am travelling alone. What about you? I am travelling with my father. She nodded. Well, I have no one else to travel with. You are alone in the world? Asked Marshall. Not quite. But for a long time I had a husband who kept me in a virtual prisoner. Now he is dead, killed in a coaching accident, and I have the freedom to do what I want. Where are you headed for? To the Black Forest, Germany. She smiled. What will you find there? My mother. Annie looked into the sea. It had been easy to slip into the barn where her father's coach was kept, while he and Clarence dined together. Not quite as easy to loosen the wheel's axle, but eventually she had managed it. They were going on one of their trips to London. The roads were rough. A loose wheel was a dangerous thing. She smiled to herself. Where are you going? Asked Marshall. Annie closed her eyes. She felt the sea breeze on her face. Whichever way the wind blows, she said.